Hello, welcome to the Singapore Math Live support for Primary Math 1. This recording is going to be both an intro to the course itself and also the class recording for week 1. So I want to begin by just telling you a little bit about myself and about the class that I will be giving you support for. So first, a little bit about me. The first thing I want you to know about me is that I am a homeschooling mom, and at the time I'm making this recording, I've been homeschooling for 15 years, but I'm still going strong. My youngest is currently a 6th grader. The second thing to know about me is that I have completed Primary 1 through Primary 6 4 times. I do have 4 children, and we've gone cover to cover in all of these books that I use 4 times through, and what I have found is that it has produced in my kids very, very, very strong mathematical foundations. So the third thing would be that I really am convinced of the solid foundation that Singapore Math curriculum provides. I always say this about myself, that I have a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the University of Oklahoma. I taught in Texas public schools for 7 years, including AP Calculus, and when I taught my son 2nd and 3rd grade Singapore Math, I began to learn to think mathematically in ways that I wasn't taught in school. And so many people who end up being engineers or math teachers or whatever automatically think in a mathematical way, and you'll see more what I mean by that as we go through the curriculum. But for me, I didn't think that way automatically, and I wasn't taught that way. I simply did math well. And when I began to learn from Singapore Math, it occurred to me that we can actually teach people to think mathematically, and that will allow our students to grow in their ability to be better mathematicians. And in a sense, the world of math and science is somewhat limited to the people who naturally think that way, and we don't teach students to think that way. I believe solidly that Singapore Math teaches students to think mathematically, and that it's an excellent curriculum choice. So I guess that fits under the About Me category because it's about my beliefs of Singapore Math. There are some other facts that I want you to know as you begin doing Primary Math 1. As you begin Primary Math 1, I want you to know, first off, it is not hard. It is not a difficult curriculum as it is in Primary Math 1, but on the second part of that, it is not a rush. Please do not rush through it and feel like you have to get on to something hard in order to be doing something beneficial to your child's math education. And the third thing to know is that it is enough. As you do primary math, and I have again done it with all of my kids, and I have seen when we're finished with Primary Math 6, you can take pre-algebra. You're very prepared for pre-algebra, and that could be a 7th grade course, and then Algebra 1 could be an 8th grade course, and in America, Algebra 1 8th grade is considered the advanced track. If you have an advanced student who is very capable, they can go straight from Primary Math 6 into Algebra 1 with very little modification, and that's not today's topic. We'll talk about that when you get to Primary 6, but I have had, actually all 4 of my kids have gone into Algebra 1 in the 7th grade and have completed extremely high levels of math in high school. And so this prepared them for that, and I solidly believe that we are in good shape. So please don't feel the need to rush through Primary 1 because it's too easy. There's plenty of things to do in your day with your little ones besides do a ton of math, and if you finish Primary 1 in 1st grade, you have done enough math. You are fine for later. That doesn't mean you can't do more, but I want to give you confidence that if that's all you do, you have done enough. So then, the next question is, why would you use Singapore Math Live? I've just told you that it's an easy curriculum and that you don't have to rush, and so why do you need my help? I think there's a few things that I can offer that could be beneficial for Singapore Math parents and families. One thing is terminology. As I work on problems here with you, I will use it and demonstrate in proper terminology and show you how to do it, not just how to say it, but even how to do math the Singapore Math way, which is probably different than the way you were taught. It was different than the way that I was taught. Then the other thing that I offer is the ability to have perspective. Some of that is just perspective on homeschooling. As a homeschooler for 15 years, and I've again, schooled my 4 kids and walked with many other homeschool moms in my homeschool support group, I have some perspective on long-term homeschooling and what is important and those kinds of things, and we'll talk through some of that I think would be helpful for you. And then I also have a long-term view of this curriculum. So there are things that when I went through it the first time, I didn't understand, why are they emphasizing this? What's the big deal? Having gone through it so many times, I understand why it's a big deal, and so now I know what to tell you. Why do we do it this way, and why is it important to do it this way, and maybe not a way that seems easier or more obvious to you at this time. So I think that Singapore Math Live can be helpful to you. I did price it very simply for Primary Math 1 and 2 so that it can be used without being a huge burden, because I would like to help you to start off your Singapore Math journey on good solid footing and not fly through the first few curriculum the first few years and then get to the other part and say, wow, we should have paid more attention to some of the things that we ignored and we didn't realize it was a big deal or was important or whatever. So those kinds of things are, I think, things that I will be able to help you with. And if you do choose to use Singapore Math Live, I have a couple of encouragements for you. There are 3 things that I think that I would like to encourage you to do for sure as you're using Singapore Math Live. The first thing is to each week watch the class recordings before you teach the week. There are things that I will say or emphasize that will be helpful. I'm sure that I'm not the most exciting thing to sit down and listen to every week, but I think that there are nuggets in there that are going to be very helpful to you. And if you can schedule some time each week to watch the recording, I'll be as brief as I can. You could certainly use a fast forward button if I'm explaining something you're terribly familiar with, but I think it's a good thing to watch that each week in order to have the foundation for the course that you need and make sure that we're talking on the same page and have things done that we're using the same methods, the same terminology. Second thing is print and use that syllabus that is listed on the website. It gives you the week's assignments. I didn't do it by day. I don't know when you're going to take a day off and go to the park or go to the zoo or whatever, but as much as possible each week, complete the material within the syllabus and stay up with the assignments and be able to do math and be done with math and have a quantifiable goal for each week and know that you did it and you checked it off. That helps your students to know this is how much we're doing this week. One of mine was very difficult to homeschool, and we finally had the realization that when that student realized that this is the amount we're doing today, whether it was a lot to do or whether they fussed about it or made it easy, that helped them out because it allowed them to settle in and do it. It wasn't like if they were being easy about it, we would do more and more and more pages. There's a finite amount of math each week. When that's through, we're finished. And yet we're not finished until we are through. And that's a very good life lesson for our homeschool children to see. The third thing is, on the back side of that, continue to be flexible. There will be times when you may not make it through every one. If we had the books to look through, we didn't do every page in every book every year. There were times when we skipped a few pages, skipped a few sections of word problems, especially in the intensive practice. I'll talk about that when we get to those problems. But there are ways to do a little less of the pages and still have an excellent math education. Be careful about being too loose. Use the syllabus and be excellent in your math. But on the other hand, you're a homeschool mom. If you're not flexible, you will not make it for the long haul. So those are just things that I would say kind of as an introduction to the course and as things that you need to know for continuing and for doing Singapore Math. So let's talk specifically about week 1 and the information that you'll encounter here. Even though it's on your syllabus, I always start a class recording with a listing of what is to be assigned this week. This week in the workbook, of course this is workbook 1A, we're doing exercises 1 through 4. In the intensive practice 1A, we're doing pages 1 through 13, and the challenging word problems book doesn't have any assignments for this week, and so there won't be anything there. I always do a recording. When I do the class recording, I discuss these books and the kind of material you're going to come up with. And then I also have a solutions recording. So this is discussed in the class recording. If there's something to do, we have a solutions recording. And the solutions recording is where I work out the problems, the word problems in in the intensive practice, there's a lot of acronyms here, the word problems in intensive practice and in the challenging word problems book. This section does not, but in the intensive practice there are times when it will have a bunch of problems to do, and then at the end of the chapter or end of the section, oh no, this one does, on page 9 it goes to word problems, so that would be in a solutions recording. I apologize. So intensive practice is broken into 2 groups. Page 1 through 8 will be discussed in the class recording, and pages 9 through 13 will be discussed in a solutions recording, generally speaking. As I begin Primary Math 1 and 2, I don't have a feel for how it will all look like. My impression is because of the easiness of this material, especially in the beginning, I probably will not make a separate recording for the solutions recording. I'll just put it all in the class recording, simply because you don't need to click and watch 2 separate recordings. I can say all that needs to be said pretty quickly. As the solutions become more difficult, I do the solutions recording so that when you get stuck on a word problem, we all get stuck on word problems. When you get stuck on a word problem, you can click on a recording, you can fast forward to the one you're stuck on, and you can see the solution. I don't know how that will look in Primary Math 1. I haven't made all the recordings yet, but I am fairly confident that there won't be many things that truly get you stuck. There will just be discussions that I need to have with you about how to say things and what to point out and what is truly important in those. So let's start in the workbook, and let me just talk for you a minute about in the workbook exercises 1 through 4, what are you going to encounter and what is important. Really, if there's anything in this section that is challenging for your student, it would just be beginning to recognize the word numbers and the word in letters and being able to match those together. You could make, if your student is having trouble reading those, you could make a list for them similar to on page 10, only you could include all the numbers and put them in order if you wanted to. And just so that they recognize that this odd assortment of letters represents the word for the number 8. And so things like that that'll help your student. If they're not reading yet, they can at least recognize the names of the letters or the names of the numbers and get there just fine. On page 14, you might notice one of the things I try to do is if there's something that's not very intuitive, to make sure to point it out to the parents so when you look at it, you know exactly what it is supposed to do. And yes, some of those numbers go backwards on that page. You're filling in a gap, and what they want you to realize is that no matter how the numbers are ordered, if you have boxes and you have a 6 and a 5, that the number that's going to go in this box is a 7. And numbers go forwards and backwards, but in this relativity, when you have it in this order, 5, 6, 7, 7, 6, 5, the number that they're missing is 7. It's not always going to go up. It's not always going to go down. Pay attention to the order that it gives it to you and go with that. So workbook is very basic this week. Shouldn't give them any trouble at all. The intensive practice has a few things that I want to point out. You are doing 13 pages in this book, but they're not hard pages, they're not long pages, but there are some things that are very interesting. And you'll find in the intensive practice book, that is where things get very interesting along the way. I'll also point out that although the workbook problems only have answers in the answer key, if you purchase that little booklet with the answer key, it actually has primary 1 through 3 in one answer book, so you buy the little book once and it gives them all to you. But the intensive practice does have answers in the back when you're trying to find something. On page 2, you have a nifty little maze. I think that's a great exercise that you're just trying to find your direction from 1 to 2 to 3, and you never go backwards, you always go forwards, and then in the end you find the numbers attached to it. It might be good to use a marker or a colored pencil for that, just to help your eyes, because all the black and white is a very busy page, and helping them to see that would be helpful. On page 3, it's an interesting page because words are important. I always tell my upper math students that mathematicians are sometimes more interested in words, have to pay more attention to words than English people do, than writers and whatever. Writers pay a lot of attention to words. But like, for example, on part D on that page, it wants to know how many people are hurt. Well, you have to really think about how you're going to define hurt. There are a lot of people who are in a dangerous situation, but if you look at that, the number of people that are hurt are 2. because there are 2 people who are being assisted and are hurt. You look at the next one, how many people are waiting for help, and that helps us to understand how many people are hurt and how many people are waiting for help. And then maybe your student says, well, all of them are waiting for help. They're on the way to the doctor. They're on the way to the hospital. They're trying to get help. But what I think it's good to help us to narrow down our thinking in math, not to overthink a math problem, right? Everybody's waiting for help, right? The firemen are waiting for help. Everybody's waiting for help. But in the context of this problem, 5 people are waiting for help and 2 people are hurt. And that may sound silly to you, but some of you have children who are way overthinking and they want to maybe argue with you about the semantics of this. And what we have to teach our kids is to think within the context of the picture. What is it really asking? It's not what else could we define the words to mean. If you don't have that child, you might think I'm crazy. If you have that child in your home, you understand exactly what I mean. Sometimes we really have to help our students to understand what is it asking and how can I answer that. Not overthink it, not make a big deal about it. Then we go on, and here's where I have a lot of perspective for you, I think, to offer. On page 4 is a color page. All right, so our students in Primary Math 1 range in ages from who knows to who knows, and there are a lot of things to consider as you do this. Some of my students, my children, when I give them a color page, it was very frustrating to them. So does a color page frustrate your student? If so, consider giving them a wide marker, maybe even a highlighter, so that when they are working on that page, it does not take a lot of time to do it. On the other hand, sometimes those fine motor skills need developing. And if you need to use math to develop your fine motor skills, great. But if math becomes a frustration because you're working on fine motor skills, that's no good. Because we don't want to have students who hate math because they have to color teddy bears and frogs within the lines and it takes them hours, right? So if they just indicate how many animals represent 4 bears and they indicate it by putting a check mark with a wide marker, is that good for your student or not good for your student? This is where you've got to be the homeschool mom and decide. Do you need to work on fine motor skills in your math curriculum? Then do it. If you need to not frustrate your child with the fine motor skills and just get them through the math and still work on fine motor skills but not in the math book, that's a good option. That's something you need to consider. But you also might have some child who finds calmness and love of math, happy place when they get to color in their math book. And that's a good thing too. Let them find that. Okay, unless they want to spend 3 days on one page, in which case maybe they need another place to color and find a good place for math. It's really a balance. But those color pages, I had very extreme responses from my children based on how they handled the color pages. And so I think you need to think about that when you do it. Along the same lines, think about the handwriting that you'll encounter. Clearly, I never mastered handwriting in a large scale in school. Mine is still something I struggle with all the time to be very, very legible. But we have a lot of things to consider with handwriting. And again, it comes down to using math to help them with the handwriting in respect to numbers, but not making math frustrating because handwriting, if it's a struggle for your child. But I would encourage you to consider working with your child to fit their answers in those boxes. Again, some of you will have children that do that naturally and simply, and some of you know what I'm talking about, that is a chore for some of the people. Writing those words out, the number words that it asks them to write out on page 6 in the intensive practice book and in other pages. I think there's some in the workbook maybe where they write the words out. That's tedious for some of our students, but it's good to slow down and write it out maybe breaking their writing out into different days. Maybe you can tell clearly I had one who struggled with writing, struggled with fitting answers in boxes, very talented at the numbers, and it really slowed his math down. I have one boy and I just said the word his. But anyway, slowed his math down to have to stop and do that. Sometimes it was incredibly frustrating for him. And so so when I worked with him, I always took that into account. Sometimes we wrote out half of the words that it asked us to because it was so tedious. And writing, I did not want the writing to limit him mathematically. On the other hand, we didn't want to speed through the whole book really fast without doing any of the writing, and then you end up with primary 2 with more requirements of fine motor skills that he wasn't ready for. So some of you are going to have the same kind of difficulties in the case of reading. Some of the reading levels, if you have to read it out loud to your student, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should they wait to do the math until they can read the instructions themselves? And I would say, again, it's a balance. It's always a balance as a homeschool parent. Whether you do it for them or you allow them to do it themselves, do you hold them back until they can read, or do you say math is not about reading, keep on going? And I think it's a balance, and the honest truth is I trust you to find that balance for your child, but be willing to balance. Be willing to slow math down to be more in line with their reading abilities, or be willing to read it to them and not hold them back. Don't rush, don't feel a rush to finish primary math at some record pace. It will be enough if you finish it in 1 year, and find the balance for handwriting and reading and math skills, not to mention math skills, right? Find that balance for your family, for your child, and don't be pressured. It's okay. I talk to a lot of moms. I've been a mom. I've got a lot of friends who are homeschooling, and I know that pressure as a homeschool mom of trying to figure it out. This one's easy. Schedule it for a year. Go at the pace your child is comfortable with. Don't frustrate them, but use all of these things together to help your child to learn all of these skills, and that'll be a good year. I also want to call your attention in the intensive practice book to page 6. Page 6 is another one that has importance of words all over it. They have to read carefully or listen carefully as you're reading it to them to know exactly which number we're looking for. We can say things a lot of different ways. Look at letter A. A number is between 5 and 7. Look at letter G. What number comes after 8 and before 10? Those are different ways of considering the same concept. It's different verbiage that asks us the same mathematical question. Again, letter K. Letter K is just, let's not argue with our book. A sandwich is made up of at least how many slices of bread? Okay, I've made sandwiches before with one slice folded over. Probably you have too. It gives us some clue words. It says how many slices, plural, of bread. They're not trying to ask every eventuality in the entire world. Okay, generally speaking, if sandwich is made up of at least 2 slices of bread, you could have a double and put 3 slices of bread. But I don't know what they're trying to do here. I use these kind of problems for my students to get over semantics. We are not here for semantics. We don't need to argue about semantics. We do need to pay attention to the importance of words, and somehow balancing that is, believe it or not, part of our lesson in Primary Math 1. That same thing carries over to the word problems. In the word problems, number 2, this is word problems on page 9 in the intensive practice book. We want to know how many guests are at the party. On number 3, we want to know how many children are at the park. And so when you look at the picture, you have to interpret it. Are those big people in the picture guests? How about at the park? Are the big people in the picture children? And so those things, they're not necessarily cut and dried. You can use the back of the book to help you know what they want you to answer. And again, I think it's interesting to help our children to learn to struggle with the words and to think about what they mean and to begin to have an intuitive understanding of what is being asked. And yet it's okay to argue with it yourself. You could look at those pictures and say, well, it depends on how you look at the picture, and discuss that. It's great to discuss it and have an understanding of the different things. And I don't mean to make this really complicated. I had children who wanted to argue semantics. And then you know what? When we get to the SAT test, this is why this is important. On the SAT test, if you get really careful with the semantics, or the ACT, I pick on the SAT because that's what we took more. SAT, ACT, you have to understand what are they asking. And if you overthink the problems sometimes, you can get yourself in a hole and take a lot of extra time. So I want my students to not overthink the SAT and ACT, and I think on some really silly level, maybe you think I'm totally ridiculous at this point, on some level, not overthinking that begins with helping them to understand how to look at and answer a question without overthinking it, even at this level. All right, so now that I've scared you with all of those things, the take the challenge questions in this book and in all the books are often very difficult kinds of problems. In primary one, at least in this section, they're nice and easy, so we're not going to panic about them. I don't even need to talk to you about them, except to say, please don't ever skip them. Please attempt them. If you struggle with them, and you will later struggle with them, that's what the recordings are for, and it'll help you out with them and allow you to do them easily, or to see the skill involved in doing them. But those are really thinking skills problems. More than math concepts, they become thinking skills, and we want our students to be logical thinkers. We want them to be able to be methodical thinkers, to understand what is being asked, to pull together skills from outside of just one particular area. You pull together several skills and are able to solve it some way. Again, in this particular one, they're not, I don't need to have another recording to tell you anything else. It's a very simple skill to do. But overall, the take the challenge ones can be difficult. Don't give up on them. We really want our kids to become this kind of thinker, and those problems will give it to you. And with my help with the recording, you'll be able to do them, and they'll be very helpful. All right, so that is the end of the first week. It's all I'm going to give you. I'm not going to make another recording for the intensive practice word problems. This is all you need, and you're good to go. I hope you have a great start, and that you find Singapore Math Live to be extremely helpful to you as you journey through this curriculum. Thank you.